Hi, welcome back and thanks for watching again. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at this pedal. Okay, it is a Guyatone PS-033 distortion for bass. I'd never heard of this pedal, but I was watching the JHS show one day and they were doing a deep dive on the Rat pedal. I think right around the time they released the Rat Pack. But Josh said that this was in fact a Rat clone with an added clean blend, and obviously I never knew that. I hadn't really paid attention to the Guyatone bass pedals, but I'm a huge fan of Guyatone and their stuff. I have their amps, I have some of their pedals, and then I actually have one of their guitars as well. But anyway, so I thought that was really cool and I wanted to try one out for myself. And they're not that easy to find, even here in Japan, but they're also not that difficult to find either. So they do occasionally pop up, and I was recently able to find one. And I played through it and then took it apart and traced the schematic. And sure enough, it is a Rat clone. There are some differences. Obviously, the biggest difference being that because this is made for bass, it passes through a lot of bass frequencies, and so when you initially play it with a guitar it sounds way woolly and bassy, and so that was kind of what caught me off guard, because I was in my mind I was thinking it was just going to be a Rat, but that was totally different. But then once I traced the circuit, and we'll look at the schematic later, but once I traced the circuit, I was able to add a little switch here, and so you can see that I have a little makeshift switch here, and I didn't want to drill a hole into the chassis yet, so I sort of wired it and then had the wires running through where the battery snap comes out, and so that it's kind of reversible in the mod, and this is stuck on with tape. But anyway, so I added a little switch so that I could go through different bass cutting options, and I was able to get really close to a Rat. And so today we're going to compare it against a Rat clone that I built a year ago, and we'll see how it sounds, how close they are and how different they are. I'll have some loops set up too, so that we can hear the same loop played back to back against this and the Rat, and then going through the different bass options. And then I'll just do some random noodling as usual, just to see how this sounds, and then we'll play around with the clean blend. Anyway, enough talking. Let's dive into the first comparison, which is a direct comparison of this against my clone Rat. And so I hope you enjoyed the video, and as usual, thanks for watching. Okay, so we have the two pedals lined up back to back. I'm just using a battery here because I'm just too lazy to open it up and put the battery inside. But anyway, they're both battery powered, and with this switch in the up position as it is right now, that's going to be our stock setting. So as this pedal came, I have a loop, a very simple loop, and I'll just play that through with the clean tone first, and then we'll listen to it with the two pedals. Okay, and so now let's start off. I think we'll start off with the Rat clone. And so this is the Rat clone with this switch in the up position. It's the regular silicon diodes. In the down position, it's going to be LEDs, and in the middle, it's going to be no clipping diodes and just the op amp. But anyway, we're going to keep it in the silicon diode mode. So this is just the stock Rat circuit. This is our gain, this is our output level, and this is our tone. Okay, and so now let's go over to the Guyatone, and again with a switch in the up position, this is the stock mode, and these settings are what I found as close as possible to the Rat. Obviously, the bass response is very different because it's a distortion made for bass. But with these settings, they sounded as close as I could get them to be to the Rat. I have the clean blend off, and so that there's no clean signal coming through. It's just a 3-knob distortion. Okay, and then let me just insert a little segment where we play those back to back so you can get an idea of how different they sound. Okay, and now let's play the same loop again, and I'm going to flick through this switch that I implemented, and I'll talk about the switch right after this when we look at the schematic, but for now let's just flick through the different switch positions. Okay, and so you can definitely hear that the bass response changes quite a bit. And now one last thing I want to do before we go into the schematic is I want to change some of the knob settings to get it to what I thought was closest to the Rat. And so we'll... okay, and so with the switch in the middle, let's compare it once again to the Rat with those settings. Play the same loop again. Okay, and so I think they sound pretty close with these settings for now. And so with a switch in the middle, it does kind of become your regular Rat pedal for a guitar. But anyway, let's jump into the schematic, take a look at the schematic, and see what that tells us. Okay, so we're taking a look at the schematic now, and this is the schematic for the Guyatone that I traced, and this is the schematic for the Rat that I found online, and this is what I based my clone off of. You'll see that they're very, very similar. They both have the LM308, like I talked about earlier. The Guyatone has an input buffer here with a transistor, so it's an emitter follower input buffer, but aside from that they are very similar. And then I didn't trace the entire circuit just because I got a little lazy, but I'm guessing that from the output of this FET, this is going to go into some kind of a summing op amp circuit, because there's actually another op amp inside. So I'm just guessing that this is going to go into some kind of level control and then blend in with the clean signal coming off of something. I would guess right off of the emitter here. So probably from right here, it's probably going to come off and blend in with the drive signal into a summing op amp and then go into an output. We're not really going to focus on that for this comparison. We're just going to look at the core overdrive distortion schematic, and you can see that these two are very, very similar. And I would say that the cause for the biggest tonal differences between these two pedals is going to be this part right here. And obviously there are a lot of different things. Values are going to be different, and you'll see that some of the components are a little different, but in my personal opinion, those values are going to make a small difference in the tone, but this is probably the main aspect that we should focus on when comparing these two. And so if you watched the video from last week where we talked about just very briefly how the non-inverting op amp amplifier works, we talked about the capacitor here making a big difference in the bass response of that circuit. And so if you're interested, you can go back and watch that. I don't go into crazy depth of how it actually works, but I do talk a little bit in a very simplified way of how that capacitor affects the bass response of a non-inverting amplifier. But if you look here, there are two sort of bass cutoffs. I don't like to call it a cutoff because we're not really cutting the bass, but we're amplifying the bass less than the rest. but we'll just call it a bass cutoff for simplicity's sake. And so you'll see that there are two bass cuts in parallel, and over here we only have one. This would be more of a typical sort of setup where you only have one resistor and one capacitor. You'll see that in a ton of overdrive and distortion pedals, and it's very common, and it is what we used in our previous breadboard build. But with the Rat, you have two in parallel, and what that is doing is that it's cutting off the sort of the mid bass at one frequency, and then even cutting off a lot more bass at a lower frequency. So you have sort of a double bass cutoff, and that's what makes the Rat unique, in that you cut off a lot of bass, but you still have some of the mids left over, because you have one cutting off at sort of a mid bass frequency, and then you're cutting off a ton of bass at a lower frequency. With this Guyatone, what I did was I changed the capacitor here, the 10 microfarad capacitor, and with that you only have one cutoff. So I was sort of left to have to try to find what my ears felt were closest to the Rat. And so it's not exactly going to be like a Rat, whereas the Rat has a little bit of mid bass and then just a ton of low bass cutoff. I was trying to find something that sounded very close to the Rat, but that part is going to be the biggest difference. And so what I've done is, where we have the 10 microfarads here, I put a 0.68 microfarad capacitor and replaced the 10 with that. And the reason why I chose the 0.68 is just because trial and error. I tried a bunch of different capacitors, and I tried to find what sounded closest to the Rat. And so that was how I ended up with a 0.68. But then what I did was, with the added switch, I have two capacitors that are going to be in parallel with that 0.68 microfarad capacitor. And so when I have the switch flicked one direction, it's going to add a 1 microfarad capacitor, making the total 1.68 microfarads. And then when I flick the switch the other way, it's going to add a 10 microfarad capacitor, and making the total 10.68 microfarads. So the 10.68, the 0.68 is probably not going to affect it that much. So you can think that that's going to be the stock sound. And the other way, with the 1.68, that is just sort of what my ears felt like was an in-between bass response between the 0.68 and then the stock 10 microfarads. And so we'll hear a little bit more of that later on when we do the comparison. But again, this is just the schematic. They are very, very similar. And so, as was mentioned in the JHS video, the Guyatone PS-033 is in fact a Rat clone with an added clean blend, but with the bass frequency response modified quite a bit to accommodate a bass, because naturally it is a bass distortion. Let's go back into the pedal comparison, and we'll play through some tones so you can get a better idea of how they actually sound compared to one another. Okay, so we're back with the two pedals, and I've set up several other loops as well, and so we'll listen to those loops again, comparing the two. And also I'll go through different switch settings so that we can hear the bass response after looking at the schematic and knowing what's going on there. So the first thing we'll do is, I have another simple loop set up with the neck pickup, which is going to have a lot of bass, and so you'll definitely be able to hear that difference in bass response between the different switch positions, and then we'll compare that against the Rat. And so let's start with that. Okay, and so you can definitely hear a huge difference in the bass response when we're using the neck pickup. And so the next thing I want to do is I have another loop set up. I actually have two loops set up, one with single note lines, and I wanted to get sort of that quacky harmonic pick scraping kind of sound, because I think that's the cool part of a rat pedal and a lot of high distortion pedals, is to get that clicky pick scraping kind of harmonic sound. Let's hear this loop with the different settings on the Guyatone and then also with the rat clone. Let's start off with the rat clone. Okay, so you can definitely again hear the similarities. Like when we had the switch in the middle position, they sounded very, very similar. You could probably fool someone into thinking that this is a rat. And then once we added more bass into the signal, it sounded like a completely different pedal. It almost sounds like a big Muff at times because there's so much bass in there. But anyway, that could be an interesting thing if you're looking for that kind of tone. But let's move on. Do one more thing, which is I'm going to add the clean blend with the same loop and then see how that's going to be different. And I'll do it back to back with the clean blend and without the clean blend. So let's hear how that sounds. Okay, so now let's just go through the gain knob and the tone slash filter knob and get an idea for the range of tones that you get just quickly sweeping through different settings on the knob. And so I'll stay on the bridge pickup. The switch is going to stay in the middle position, which is going to be the least amount of bass, so the closest tone to a rat pedal. And I'll leave the clean blend to 0, and the output volume is right around 2 o'clock, which I think is close to unity. And so let's start off with the gain knob. I'm going to leave the filter knob at 3 o'clock because to my ears that sounded the best. But with the rat pedal, the amount of bass and treble is going to change as you turn the gain up or down. So you'll notice that when we have the gain down, it's going to sound really trebly without touching the filter knob, and then once we crank the gain, it's going to sound really bassy, and that's just part of the schematic and the design of the rat pedal. But we'll leave the filter knob at 3 o'clock, and let's just quickly go through the gain knob. Okay, so you can get an idea of the range of gain that you can get. Obviously, just by nature of the design of this pedal, you're never really going to get kind of an overdrive slash crunch tone. So it's going to stay as a hard clipping, high saturation distortion tone, pretty much wherever you have the gain knob. And it's just going to be a subtle variation in the amount of distortion. Okay, so anyway, let's turn the gain back up to around 2 o'clock where I like it, and then we'll change the filter knob, the tone knob, and see what kind of ranges we can get there. Okay, so you can see that as with any other rat pedal variation, there's not a whole lot as far as a usable range goes, and the sweet spot is kind of right around here, I would say, in this range right around here. And again, it depends on where you have the gain knob set. But the tone knob for the rat pedal is very similar to what we used in our breadboard build. It's a very simple RC filter where you're changing the resistance. But anyway, so let's move on to the next part. Okay, and so the next thing I want to go into is the clean blend. And so I'll first show how the clean blend works. We'll start off with this, the switch is in the middle, so this is sort of the rat position. And I'll go through what it sounds like with the clean blend added. And go back onto the bridge pickup. Okay, so you don't hear a huge difference, but you could definitely hear that clean signal added into the distortion, and especially when I play the chords on the high notes. can definitely hear that added clean tone. And so what I want to do now is turn the distortion level all the way down, and we'll start off with a clean level at noon. So the tone knob doesn't make a difference, and it would be the same for the gain knob, and that's pretty obvious because when we looked at the schematic earlier, the tone knob and the gain knob were all part of the sort of the rat circuit element of this pedal, and so unlike something like a Klon or like a Maxon OD820, where you have the tone knob come after the clean blend, so you could have just a clean signal and then be able to adjust the tone accordingly. This pedal has the tone knob within that distortion part of the circuit, and so that when you have just the clean signal coming through, you can't really control it at all. You only have the amount of volume that you can control. And as we'll see right now, there isn't a whole lot of volume on tap, so you couldn't really use it like a clean boost. I think right here at 3 o'clock, this is close to unity. And so that's the clean knob. Okay, so now let's try adding a little bit of that gain into this clean signal. So we'll leave it maxed out, and we'll go back to the bridge pickup, and what I want to do is slowly add in some gain, and we'll see how that affects the overall tone. This is all about personal preference, but I think what you just heard is probably the reason why you don't see a lot of rat pedals with an added clean blend. Because the rat is such a fuzzy, fizzed out distortion sound, when you add it to your clean signal, it just sounds like there's something going on, like there's a bad connection within your signal chain. It just has this, it almost like you have a clean signal, but then you have this weird hair added onto the notes. So again, and that compared to just the overdrive, and then this is a little too quiet, but it just sounds a little weird with the added clean signal. I think if you used it with a bass, which is what this was intended for, it does make a lot of sense, because you could have a really hairy bass tone with with a note definition of the clean signal coming through. So it does seem a little strange, but I would say that that only holds true when you have the gain really high, which is what we have now. And so what I want to do, you get this really nice crunch, almost like an overdrive, nice crunchy overdrive, and on to the neck pickup. Okay, so I think it has a really nice crunch tone to it. Totally usable and really nice. You would definitely not expect this kind of sound out of a rat pedal. And so with the clean knob and then changing some of the other settings, you could definitely go beyond your regular normal rat pedal. And one thing, because we have the added benefit of a clean blend, even when we have the switch in the up position, which is pretty much our stock mode with the crazy amount of bass in there, if we add the clean signal, it's going to add the note definition and the transients of the guitar signal, and by having that, it doesn't sound as woolly, and so it's got that crazy amount of bass, a lot of woolliness and a lot of distortion, a lot of saturation, but because we have a clean tone blended in with it, we are still retaining the note definition of the guitar. I'm just going to do some quick stuff, especially when you go above the 12th fret on the neck pickup, and get that sort of creamy Big Muff-ish kind of tone. I thought that really sounded cool, so let's just play some stuff real quick and see how that sounds. And so let's move on to the sort of the in-between bass response. So plenty of bass again, and it has a really cool saturation tone to it. Okay, so that was taking a look at the Guyatone PS-033 distortion for bass. If you are a bass player, obviously this is a great pedal with a lot of versatility. But also for the guitarist, if you are able to go in and do the mod that I did, I don't think you have to add the switch like I did. You could probably just go with a 0.68 or something in that range. So if you're willing to go in and replace that capacitor and make it close to a regular rat, with the clean blend, it makes it a really versatile pedal, and I hope I demonstrate just a little bit of it in the hands of a much capable guitarist. I think you'd be able to get a lot of tones out of this. But anyway, I think it's a great pedal, and these are still floating around for a relatively affordable price. And if you're into the op amps, this still has that legendary LM308, so it's authentic in that way as well. So yeah, I think it's a great pedal, and I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, please share your thoughts in the comment section below. I'd love to hear what you all think. And thanks for watching, and please stay tuned for the next video.